morning again. I do have a few announcements, but before we do those and get started, although most everyone was upstairs for Mass, so we've already arguably had an opening prayer. Never hurts to have an extra. So I'm going to call on Kevin McKeon. He is a member of our steering committee, a representative from St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Patrick's Combined Parish in Binghamton, and Kevin is going to offer an opening prayer. Kevin?
Thank you, David. Before I begin with the opening prayers, I'd like to acknowledge that tomorrow is Mother's Day, as you all know, and we pray for God's blessings for all those in motherhood, and may they ever follow the example of Mary, Mother of our Lord. So happy Mother's Day to our DPC members. And I'd also ask you to keep in mind Tina Dyers, our Executive Secretary of the DPC, in today's prayers, that she wasn't feeling well enough to be here today. As you know, that she's instrumental in organizing much of what goes on at our meetings. So in this spirit, we'll begin by reciting a prayer to Mary, Mother of the Church, composed by Pope Paul VI, who in 1964 at the Second Vatican Council declared the Blessed Virgin Mary as Mother of our Church. And it's in your packet, it's on the reverse side, I think. So if you all join me with this prayer. O Virgin Mary, Mother of the Church, to you we recommend the entire Church. You who are the helper of bishops, protect and assist the bishops in their apostolic mission, and the many priests, religious and lay people who collaborate with them in their martyrs' tasks. You were given as mother to the best loved disciple by your divine Son at the moment of his saving death. Remember the Christian people who entrust themselves to you. Remember all your children. Support their prayers addressed to God. Make strong their faith. Make firm their hope. Increase their love. Remember those who are in tribulation, in need, in danger. Above all, those who suffer persecution, who have been cast into prison for their faith. For these, O Virgin, obtain fortitude, and hasten the longed-for day of their just liberation. Look with benign eyes on our separated brethren, and deign to unite us. You who brought forth Christ as the bridge of union between God and mankind. Amen. If you'll flip it over, I'll ask you to join me in reciting this short opening prayer too. After which the bishop will be leading us in today's hymn. So, Heavenly Father, fill us with your Holy Spirit and courage, so that we might bring our talents and gifts to this important work. Open our minds to the task at hand. Open our ears to each other. Open our hearts to your will. And we pray for the people of Ukraine and the end to the war. We make this prayer in your name. Amen. Thank you.
Immaculate Mary, your praises we sing. You reign now in splendor with Jesus our King. Ave, Ave, Ave Maria. Ave, Ave,
Thank you, Kevin. I'm going to make a few announcements, but before that, I'm going to ask Monsignor Lane to introduce the members of the diocesan staff that are here with us this morning.
Good morning. We've now heard the wonderful musical tones of Bishop Lucia, who of course leads the list. And I know that Father Kirkman is here. I don't see where he is. There he is. He's at the door. And he's our Vicar General. And right next to him is Daniel Cummings, who is our Chancellor. As we look around the room, in the alcove over there that looks like the library, you'll find the members of our youth and young adult ministry team, Terry, Mary Angela, and Bob. And you'll also find Andrea Slavin over there, who's sitting in with her floor mates. I'm looking for someone from the Catholic Son, and certain somebody. Thank you, and you are? Eileen Jealous. Good morning. I'm glad you're with us. I had written down the wrong possibility. Sister Katie Eve is here. She's got multiple assignments. The Synod right now is the biggest one on her current list, but she's got real biggies coming up with the next sessions that come, including the Diocesan Synod and the 3 years of Eucharistic renewal and building. Jacqueline Brissett is here. At the back of the room, she's responsible for our very important youth protection system. And she and her team have been doing an amazing job. Sister Laura Pavano is here from the Office of Pastoral Leadership. Sister Laura is here. Oh, there she is. Just going down the list to make sure I got everybody, but Tony is here, right here from the wonderful Lord of the Foundation. And we heard all kinds of good things from her. And Teresa May is here, who's from the local faith formation community, which had pieces for Teresa Land. There's Teresa over on the far side. And I think, looking quickly at the list, that I've hit everyone from inside the chancery. Did I miss anyone? Because I certainly would want to be able to introduce you. Okay, enjoy, folks. It's good to be with you.
Thank you, Monsignor. Do we have any first-timers? People here for their first DPC meeting?
One hand.
Welcome. Put your hands up. We hope you find this a meaningful, worthwhile experience. Just a few general announcements now, and then we'll get started on the agenda items. You all have in your packet name tags, and as you've heard me say from meeting to meeting, we need you to fill these out, give contact information on the back, because that's how we keep track of attendance and keep track of your email address so we can send you the minutes and announcements of import as to this meeting, other meetings in general. And for your calendaring purposes, this is the last meeting of this DPC year in term of office for several of us, but to mark your calendars, the first meeting for next fall is going to be on Saturday, September 10th, and the second one will be Saturday, November 5th. Both of those meetings, as far as I know, will be right here at Holy Cross, preceded by the 9 a.m. Masses. I indicated that when you fill out these name tags, you're going to use those. Well, it's important for you to then use the email that you get from Tina as the executive secretary and forward those emails, the minutes of the meeting, to your respective pastors and to members of your parish councils back in your home parishes so that they know what's going on. When the meeting ends today, we're going to have had lunches ready. If pick up as you go out, you're welcome to either take them with you or eat them right here and have some camaraderie with other members that are here for DPC. I guess that's about it at this point. So we're going to start. The next item on the agenda is to have some follow-up now that Bishop Lucia and Sister Katie have pretty well finished their listening sessions tour of the diocese. They're going to report back now as to general feedback themes that they've developed. So I'll call on Bishop Lucia and Sister Katie.
Well, what I'll say to you, just as a way of introduction, is we have 2 more sessions to go. 2 more sessions, one down in Windsor, and the Lord has a way, the Lord has a sense of humor, because the first time we canceled in Windsor, it was because of COVID. The last time supposedly we canceled in Windsor is because I was on crutches and also on some muscle relaxants, which I wasn't very coherent, to be honest with you. And but as it turned out, they got over a foot of snow, so we wouldn't have gone anyways. So hopefully the Vigil of the Ascension. That's the plan now. The Vigil of the Ascension will be the listening session for them. And the other one that we had to cancel was Pulaski, and Pulaski will be, I think, the day before or something, that same week. So those are the 2 last listening sessions that we need to have. They've been very good in the sense that I think we've hit colleges, we've done special sessions, we've done the sessions in the parishes, and as you see the numbers just up there very quickly, they're saying 39, and there's been some impromptu ones, so we've done pretty good, and so it'll be like 40, 42, something like that. And then the number of speakers, as you've seen, are like 725, and the written response is 142. So we've heard from almost 1,000 people. So I don't think that's a bad effort. And I have to admit, I think it's pretty good when you sit through 42. But it's helped me a lot. It's helped me a lot personally, and it's really helped me to even move forward with a vision as your bishop, and so I'm very grateful. So I'm going to let Sister Katie talk a little bit more about what we found in this process, and then again, if you have any questions, we have a little bit of time today to answer your questions.
Thank you, Bishop. Just by way of affirmation of our bishop, mostly, I was on a Zoom call the other day with out of the national office for the Synod from the USCCB, which is a meeting of all the coordinators. And it was facilitated by Father Dave McCallum, who is a Jesuit who at one time was at Le Moyne and is now part of the Secretariat for the World Synod, So we broke into small groups and, tell us what you're doing and so on and so forth. And then we came back into the large group, all by Zoom, of course. And, what did you hear? And it was wonderful, we shared a lot of common experiences and good ideas and so on. But so I spoke, and Father McCallum said, well, I want you to know that Sister Katie is from the Diocese of Syracuse, And their bishop, Bishop Doug Lucia, he has been at every single listening session in his diocese. I think he's the only bishop that has done that. And we're very proud of him. So you've got kudos in Rome, Bishop.
That's not always good.
Yeah. So again, what you have here is a very brief summary of what we've heard. Again, you know, we have a wonderful administrative assistant, Catherine Sparacco. Some of you know her. She has come to almost every single session of the listening sessions and taken notes, and we practically have a verbatim. She's such an excellent note taker, it amazes me. We practically have a verbatim record of what was said. And then she also began, as we moved along, to identify the themes and begin to put together a chart. Now, the last time I checked, her chart was 52 pages long, and that was probably a month and a half ago. So I have no idea how long it is now, but she just pulled some of the suggestions. What she did was kind of identify the themes, the topics, what we're hearing, and then from that chart, she pulled together this summary sheet for you. So even though Catherine's not here, I want to give her kudos because she has done an amazing amount of work and done it very well. So what she's done, as you can see, is identify the topics that we've heard and an indication of how many people spoke to that topic. So you can see, we don't need to read through this by word because you have this and you can look at it at your leisure. But what I would say is, in any given topic, what we have heard ranges from one end of the theological spectrum to the other, So in one sense, that's a little overwhelming because how does one, especially for the bishop, how does one pastor people with such a wide range of hopes and dreams? We've kind of focused the listening sessions, although we use the three questions, those of you who've been at a listening session, one from the Holy Father, one from Bishop Lucia's pastoral letter, and then the very general one, which is what else would you like to say to the bishop? And when we go to the listening sessions, everybody skips the first two questions, goes right to what do I want to say to the bishop? Which is fine, And the sessions have been long. By the time we get to 39 or 40, they've become a little repetitive. But each time, it's amazing to me, the most common theme, I would say, is people's gratitude for the opportunity to speak of their hopes and their dreams and their concerns. And almost every speaker says that before they talk about what they want to say to the bishop, So there was a real sense of people, and some people verbalized it. No one has ever asked me before what my hopes for the church were. Nobody's ever asked me what my concerns are. So just the sense of the people of God in Syracuse being heard, and really not just listened to, being heard, has been an overarching grace. I would call it a grace, And one point a couple weeks ago, at some meeting, I forgot which meeting, I said, well, we'll probably do more listening sessions, when we get ready for the diocesans, and then the bishop went, ugh. But the process has been wonderful. And as I participate in these Zoom calls with the other people from other dioceses, everyone seems to be saying that. The process itself has been a gift. And the gratitude of the people of God is universal in their gratitude for being a part of the process, the crucial part of the preparation for the synod meeting. And that's not to say that people have agreed with each other and so on. As I said, we've heard every from every point along the theological spectrum. And the bishop is often quoting a Catholic author who says, the word Catholic means here comes everyone, you know. And so we've heard from everyone. Now, 750 people attending a listening session is a good number. It's a great number. You know, it's not everyone in the diocese. Not everyone in the diocese could or were able to participate in a listening session. But as you can see on the sheet, we've also had over 140 written responses, you know. So the process has been a gift and a grace. And the listening sessions, in some ways, have been difficult. In this sense, people who love the church but have concerns. You know, mothers of LGBTQ persons. Many, many times parents speaking about how important the faith is to them, but their children, as they grew and became adults, no longer participate actively. And the heartbreak that is. You know, the concern for the youth. How do we keep our youth engaged? We had the 3 special listening sessions geared not exclusively, but particularly to the LGBT community. One of them in particular was just heartbreaking. I cried through the whole thing. You know, to hear these people who love the church and love the faith, who don't feel welcome. You know? But again, they were so grateful that the bishop came to hear their stories. So the process is a grace. The courage of people who spoke is inspiring. There were some, you know, we always talked about, you know, we want to hear your hopes, your concerns, your hopes, your dreams, and your concerns. And about a third of the way through, I said to the bishop, well, one thing I've learned is there are hopes, and there are dreams, and there are concerns, and then there are complaints. You know, but the people who had complaints had a vehicle to voice them. You know, everyone did. So the process has been wonderful. So again, I don't want to read through these, but you can see the different issues that have been raised. You know, just general concerns, which would start with general hopes for our church, youth and young adults, as I mentioned. Many people spoke of their parish experience, which makes sense. That's where we experience church most directly, is in our parishes. And most people were very grateful for their parish and for their pastor. There were a few who had statements under the list of complaints, you know. but they came, they participated, and they were heard. The quality of liturgy, the centrality of Eucharist. People, you know, spoke of how concerned they are. That kind of goes along too with the, you know, the shortage of priests. What are we going to do about the shortage of priests? We need the Eucharist. So that certainly was brought out in many listening sessions. The concern for both the catechesis that takes place in parish programs and our Catholic schools. How can we enable them to thrive? How can we, you know, how can we pass on the faith to our children and teens? And then, interestingly, very often people spoke about the need for adult faith formation. You know, if one of the reasons that the attendance in our Catholic schools is down and the attendance in parish catechetical programs is down, it may be because the parents don't have a clear understanding of our faith, or at least not a clear way to articulate, you know, what it is we believe and why. So, to be honest, that thrilled me that they wanted us to provide more opportunities for adults to deepen their faith. Obviously, the role of women became a very common theme. Some arguing for I shouldn't say arguing, what's the word I want? Thank you. Encouraging the church to consider the ordination of women, but beyond that, to just simply acknowledge the gifts that women bring to the church and increase the ways those gifts can be used. So it certainly included the desire for ordination of women, but it was not exclusively that. It was simply how can the gifts of women be enhanced for the church. And then in general, the role of lay people. Many people spoke about how concerned they were about their pastors, especially where pastors have responsibility for 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 parishes. How can the lay people take on some of the administrative tasks so that the pastors can be pastors? Okay, so that came up quite often. The role of deacons. Many people spoke of their appreciation if they have deacons in their parish, but also wondered if they could be given more responsibilities. Of course, the overarching theme, which has been our theme and goal of the diocese, of evangelization. And then some specific suggestions about what might happen in the diocese. And of course, you must remember that in 2024 we will be holding a diocesan synod. So just a good start on what people's thoughts are about that as we move toward diocesan synod. So for me, I admit, I keep saying to the bishop, I used to travel all around the diocese when I was director of faith formation, and it didn't cost me anything. Now, of course, I'm 11 years older. I get home and I'm like, oh my God, I'm tired. But in the sessions themselves, I'm usually energized, by what I hear, by the gratitude that people express, and by the opportunity to gather in the midst of a central New York winter and a pandemic, that we've been able to gather together to speak of our hopes and our dreams and our concerns. And what I said from the beginning is, I believe the Synod holds such great hope for our church that I am thrilled to be part of the planning for it and the participation in it. So this is just phase 1. Phase 1 is the listening sessions. By the end of June, we have to prepare a 10-page report for the USCCB. And I recently got an email from the USCCB with directions on how to write the report. I thought it was just going to be write the report, Oh no, there's very specific instructions about who must be involved and how, Anyway, it'll be wonderful. And I think the good work that Catherine has done will enable us to synthesize, whatever it is, probably about 200 pages by now of input that we have. We have to get it down to 10 pages. But I really am confident that we'll be able to do that and represent what we have heard throughout our diocese. Now, what I would ask is, one of the things you have said, Bishop, is that we don't have to wait till the Synod to implement some of which we've heard. So would you just take a minute to talk about how we've already, I should say you have already begun to implement some of what we've heard?
Well, before I do that, I just want to, again, thank Sister Katie and Catherine. But luckily, they've been my traveling companions for most of those nights, so at least I wasn't driving hither and thither with just by myself, so the company was well appreciated. You might think I have a headache when you see all this on paper, but I really don't. As Sister said, in many ways this energizes me. It energizes me because the church is alive. And it means we're also looking forward. And as you and I look forward, yeah, as I say, here comes everybody. And so and we know the bottom line is we're not going to please everybody, okay? But on the other flip side of that, my whole role as bishop, I think you've heard me say it before, there is a Latin word for bishop that we don't use often, except regarding the Bishop of Rome, and that is pontifex. And the word pontifex actually means bridge builder. And actually every bishop is pontifex. That's why if you ever see the Bishop of Rome is called the Supreme Pontiff, well, the word pontiff is actually pontifex, bridge builder. But actually each bishop is pontifex. He's called to be a bridge builder. So part of my thing is how do we build bridges? How do we repair bridges? Now, I will tell you, this is no exaggeration, one of my college jobs is I worked on a bridge crew. So I know all about jumping over rails onto the scaffolding below with this slick paint on the bottom of your boots, praying that you're not going to miss the rail so that you end up in the drink. So I know there's some risk involved, but for me, it's well worth the risk. I can, to be honest with you, when it comes to actually repair bridges or whatever, I know all about sanding down the rust and the primer, you name it, and the need to put in new girders at times. And that's what I see in a practical way this will involve. But you see, one concern I do have today, and this is going to be one of my great challenges, and I was thinking of this morning. One of my great challenges these days is we have a tendency to talk at each other. We don't listen with the heart, but we just talk at each other. Even what's going on in our nation in the present moment is really talking at each other. We're not talking with one another. We're not trying to get to the root of things. It's really just sometimes two groups, one wanting their way, the other one wanting their way. And unfortunately, that can happen even in the diocese. And so that's one of my challenges, to get us talking one another. Something else I often hear, and again, this is why I'm grateful that the drafting process is going to be not just me writing it or one person writing it, but it will be a consultative effort. Again, can't consult everybody that we've done, but there will be some consultation involved. But the idea is, when we send this report to Rome, to me there's a lot of good material here, and it's to reflect on the major themes that we see here. To me, that is what the report is meant to do. And part of that, too, is, again, I think I'm losing my train of thought just a little bit here, but again, my major thing is, another image I had is, so often people, I'm running into two extremes right now. My own way of leadership, my own way, is I really want the decision to be made local, or at least discussed locally, shared with me, so that together we come up with whatever we need to come up with. But so often I hear two things. Well, Syracuse is going to do what it wants anyways. That's one extreme. But then the other extreme I hear is, well, Bishop, and I did hear this in one listening session, Bishop, that's above our pay grade. You're supposed to make the decision. Well, you see, either way, you're caught. You're caught. If I make the decision, it's like Syracuse is making the decision. If I say to the people, give me your input, well, and I say this kindly but truthfully, they want to have somebody to blame. And so it might be easier to blame me than to blame the local whatever. So for me, that's one of the challenges. And so getting back, one of my images I had this morning is about the making of a pie. And sometimes at the diocesan level, if I can use it that, we might not have all the ingredients to make a pie that will feed everybody. But if we go to the local area and ask, what do you have to contribute? They might be able to make a pie so that everybody can have a piece of the pie. But sometimes it's like looking for the pie and say, okay, give me my piece. And we might not have even the ingredients to be able to make the pie. Whereas if we go and together we work, we might have enough ingredients to make the pie, and then everybody can have a piece of the pie. And so, I don't know if you get what I'm saying with that, but that's the way I'm looking at things these days. That sometimes they use a fancy word, subsidiarity. So anyways, but some ways we're already implementing this. Some just very practical ways. We have seriously taken a look at catechesis in this diocese. And we are working on some very exciting plans in the area of catechesis for all ages. So that's one fruit already. Another fruit of what we're looking at is I'm going to meet with a group of our younger priests this week for dinner. But talking to them, there's a challenge for me right now. And the challenge is this. I hear from the lay faithful that our priests are overworked. But then, on the flip side of that, work ethic might be different than, say, even I was used to, or when my generation, okay? So it's coming to that balance. Like the balance of, well, what is work? And some of it, I'll just share with you a practical thing. In my day and age, when I was ordained, Father Kurgan, we're about the same generation, there's no way we would ever tell somebody, no, you can't have a funeral because it's my day off. Okay? Unfortunately, but again, it's part of the overwork thing in one way, because there is more work. Okay? The other thing is, for me, where I see things moving, catechesis, the whole thing of parish, but spirituality, I really think trying to provide for people's needs. And some of you heard me just this morning, the Holy Spirit was working. And for those of my staff not at Mass, don't kill me, but I had this wonderful idea this morning about doing the 5 first Saturdays between now and May in the different parts of the diocese. And so we did Mass here this morning, but really we can start it next month. And of course, we're going to be at the Cathedral June 4th for a Holy Hour for Vocations, so we'll start it then. But that's part of my vision too, is the spiritual renewal. And accompanying that spiritual renewal will be the Eucharistic renewal. And there are 2 things I'm looking at for the Eucharistic renewal in the first year. Sister Katie and I have discussed this, because the first year of Eucharistic renewal, Eucharistic revival is actually what they're calling it. 2 important components on the diocesan level are catechesis, and the second would be devotion. And so 2 things that I'm thinking of is, 1, parishes having the materials, what they need for catechesis, and secondly, the idea of doing 40 hours in different parts of our diocese. Again, 40 hours, again, some might say, oh, we're going backwards. No, but you know, one thing about 40 hours, besides promoting devotion to the Eucharist, it was a great time for priestly fraternity. And that is something I think we need to build in our diocese today, is the fraternity of our priests as well. That our diocese so often thinks of itself, and that's talking about being a bridge builder, that's one of the challenges. We think of ourselves as the Mohawk Valley, or Syracuse in North, or the Southern Tier. No, we're one church. And so somehow to bring that together. So that's another area where we're moving forward. And also, those are, and again, part of this too will, again, always promoting, and again, the Holy Father has done this, and I'm going to stop here because it's 10:30. But again, the Holy Father, just in the administration, what we call the Roman Curia, he has now begun to make sure the role of women is highlighted. That will continue in our local churches. The role of women will be highlighted, and that women will be, but they already do. Maybe we just don't publicize it, but I mean, I have women who are my vicars, chancellor, you name it, they have major roles, they have a place at the table. But again, it is to encourage, and I see it not just the role of women, but also the role of laity, period, in our parishes. So I'm going to stop there. There's going to be time for question and answer, and some of you might have more question and answer after Monsignor Lang speaks, but we can talk about this more after. Okay?
Thank you, Bishop. All right, next on the agenda, I'm going to call on Jacqueline Brissette. She's going to give us an update. She heads the Safe Environment Victim Assistance Office, and obviously has been working on the Child Victims Act issues for the last 15 months. Jacqueline?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me this morning. And so I was asked to come this morning to speak about my role as an assistance coordinator. And there is a handout in your folder if you want to just look at it while I discuss it. So my role as victim assistance coordinator, I've been in this role now 10 years. My background is actually in, I have a degree in rehabilitation counseling. I'm a certified rehabilitation counselor. I'm also a certified alcohol and substance abuse counselor. I spent 20 years in the substance abuse field, and then I was blessed to come to the diocese. So I am the point of contact for anyone with an allegation of sexual abuse, either present or past, against clergy, employees, or volunteers. And the majority of calls that I've received have been from the past clergy sexual abuse. Currently, I still receive calls about laity, a lot of boundary issues, if you will, not actual sexual abuse. And so when somebody does call, it's quite interesting because they take the lead. I don't tell them what to do. I've had some people call me and say, Jack, here's my story, and I never want to speak to you again. They literally have not. Others, they will call and explain the process, and they, well, let me think about it. And then they'll give me a call back maybe a month, 2 months, 6 months, even a year later. And so again, it's up to the victim as how they determine how I walk with them. But when they do call, first and foremost, I tell them what my role is. So I am their point of contact, and I will explain everything that's going on. I will never share anything that they share with me without their permission. So when I do receive a complaint of abuse, either verbally or written, I always say, may I please share it with my boss, the chancellor, the priest, the bishop. And so I always ask for their permission, and I think that's very important that they know who their story is being shared with, because a lot of people, there's unfortunately a lot of shame, and they want to know who's going to know their story. And then, of course, I immediately encourage them to report it to civil authorities, whether it's a past allegation, because I will be reporting it to the authorities as well. As you probably all know, we have a memorandum of understanding, so there's 7 district attorneys in our 7 counties, that they receive all allegations that come into the diocese. So they know about every single file that's in my office, despite how old it is. So if something comes in that's 50 years old, they still know about it. And we do not do anything as a diocese until they come back, they review the case, and they say, okay, you may proceed with your diocesan procedures. So I tell the victim that, but I also say, please know that you have every right to report this as well. And then the other thing I offer them is mental health, reimbursement for mental health and spiritual counseling. Some people take that immediately, will take up on that offer. Others will be delayed. So like for instance, right now I have a woman who came forward in 2003, the allegation of abuse, and she lost contact with the diocese. She came back about 5 years ago, wanted some assistance with some things. We offered that to her, and now she's back for mental health counseling. So as you can see, that we will always be here for the victim, so it's not just like a one and done. Oh, you've gone to counseling and so have a nice life. So it's wherever the victim is in their entire journey of healing. And so right now we're assisting her with mental health counseling. And some victims have other requests too. One is we also offer to meet with Bishop, so people have met with Bishop Moynihan, Bishop Cunningham, Bishop Lucia, and it's unbelievable how healing that is for some victims. They'll come in, they're very angry, rightfully so, they're hurting, and once the bishop sits down and speaks with them, hears them, apologizes to them on behalf of the church, that really seems to resonate with them and contributes to their healing process. So thank you, Bishop, for doing that. And and then, like, for instance, too, I have a victim who has come forward. They actually want to go back and walk through the rectory in which they were abused. So I'm arranging that right now. So again, we try to accommodate the victim as to where they are in their healing process. So I mentioned the complaint of abuse. So we do require that anyone who comes forward with an allegation of abuse that they put it in writing. So our form is very benign, in my opinion. We basically want their name, who's the abuser, when, where. We don't need a lot of detail, but what happened, and then they sign that. We don't take anonymous reports because they can be somewhat dangerous. You never know if somebody's going to be angry with someone and just report them. So we ask people to put it in writing to us. And that is what is forwarded on to the district attorney. And we also offer counseling for people's victims' family members. We will offer up to 6 visits for family members. And so it's interesting, some victims' family members do take us up on it, but actually not as many as you would think. So when somebody does request mental health counseling, there are some requirements that we have. One, it must be a licensed clinician throughout the United States, and they have to have proper insurance, all that. And they have to make an initial assessment to the diocese. So we have a form that they write out. They say, okay, Jane Doe has depression. These are our goals for her. We're going to work on this, this, and this. And I'm asking for you to approve some sessions. And so what happens is I receive that, and based on information inside of it, we give 6 visits initially, and then 20 visits for every request thereafter. The providers send in the bills to me, and I get them processed for them. But however, we do have a treatment advisory committee, and the treatment advisory committee is made up of 3 professionals in the mental health field. Their names are on the papers that you have in front of you. Catherine Diana, she owns New Step Counseling. She has over 25 years of clinical experience in sexual abuse. She actually works with sex offenders. Her agency works specifically sexual offenders. Reverend Monsignor Rossetti, who is, of course, one of our priests, but he is down in Washington, D.C., and he's a licensed psychologist, and he's been involved in the prevention of child sexual abuse for years and years. And then Allison Spalding is the Director of Residential Community-Based Operations at Elmcrest Children's Center. So we have a lot of experience there. So these 3 individuals we called on when there might be a request for counseling that does not fall underneath our current policy, which is mental health counseling with a licensed clinician. So what will happen is sometimes people will come forward and say, hey Jack, I want to try this, or I want to do this. So I don't make that decision, nobody at the diocese. I refer it to these 3 individuals. I give them the facts, and they advise the diocese, the bishop, as to what we should do for the victim. Oftentimes, we meet them halfway. So like, for instance, somebody might ask for an alternative therapy, and they'll say, well, this doesn't fall under our policy, but we'll give you 10 visits, we'll give you 20 visits. And so we try to meet some of the needs of the victims as how they see fit. And actually, we did have one person meet with the treatment advisory committee to discuss his needs and what he wanted. And so that was unique for us, but that's where the treatment advisory committee will go above and beyond to hear from the victims. So, and again, I'm just there for them for however they see it, and that's it. So, any questions?
Yes. I have a question. We've had 2 priests in the area that I live in that were them as a victim, or if they received some kind of support, and their faith communities which were harmed essentially because they were removed immediately. And I was just curious about that and how you look at that situation.
So if you didn't hear this woman's question, priests who were removed because of an allegation that they were cleared and they were put back into their faith communities, do they receive support? Yes. The diocese will provide them the support that they need to deal with that. And we also will do, also help the faith communities. There's been times when our Chancellor Daniel Cummings has gone out to speak to them. Bishop actually has held masses. I know most recently we've had some priests return to ministry or be removed from ministry. Bishop was up there that day to speak to the congregations about that removal, the temporary removal for the investigation period. We've held healing masses. So, you know, it's really up to the faith community. Usually they reach out to us as to what their wants and needs are, and we do our very best to meet them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jacqueline, I go at the beginning and I do go when they're restored.
So, if nobody, not everyone heard that, Bishop also goes when they're restored, so. Okay, well, my name, or my number and email is on the back of this paper. So if you ever have any questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'd love to talk with you. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. You know, most of you know that the theme that we adopted for the 2021-2022 DPC term was enhancing communication. This morning I do want to announce that we are setting up a new committee. It's going to be chaired by Kathy Poupart from Chadwick's, who's a member of our steering committee, and it is specifically going to deal with the issue of enhancing communication within the diocese. And Kathy has graciously agreed to chair that committee. She's going to put the committee together. If you're interested in volunteering, whether you're on the steering committee or a DPC rep, get in touch with Kathy, and then she in turn will report back with the goals and what the committee hopes to do at our first meeting in the fall. I also wanted to announce that, as you probably know, Tom Tynan is the immediate past chairperson of DPC. Tom had to resign from further active involvement with DPC given some personal circumstances that arose. So the DPC Constitution allows me as chairperson to appoint committees, committee chairpeople as appropriate and necessary. So one of the roles of the past, immediate past chairperson is to chair the nominating committee for DPC. In light of the fact that Tom withdrew, I had already appointed Bishop Lucia and Tina Dyer to work together as the nominating committee, and they'll be reporting back, or at least Bishop will, later this morning when we get to that on the agenda. But I did want to let you know that we have had an active nominating committee, largely due to the work of Tina and Bishop. We'll be able to go forward this morning. All right, we're going to resume our agenda. Thank you. Monsignor James Lane is our vicar for parishes. He has put together a presentation on rethinking regions and the PCAs. I think after his presentation, we're hoping there'll be time for some questions and answers, but Monsignor has worked diligently on this from one end of the diocese to the other. He has always been very gracious. Many people probably wouldn't know this, but I have always feel a personal affinity to the Monsignor because 37 years ago, he was good enough to marry my wife and me. Monsignor?
It was one of the better things I've ever done. Good morning. God has taken me for an interesting walk during the last 8 or 9 months, and here's what it is. I'm so used to working in the chancery that all of a sudden I found myself as the temporary administrator of St. Mary's in Clinton, and as the assistant priest for St. Patrick's, St. Anthony's, and Chadwick's. 2 wonderful parishes, but it gave me a close-eye view of what's going on, particularly in the post-COVID era, as soon as we get to the post-COVID era. And it's interesting to watch and ponder, how do we pull this back together? One well-placed commentator has said we may never recover from this. I don't buy that, but it's not streaming's fault that things have changed, is it? It's folks got used to not coming, and now it's easier not to come than to come. Kathy Popart sent out a letter to the Chadwick's crowd and said, "We miss you. You're part of us. Why don't you please come home?" And people responded to it. And so I tried the same technique, not with as much success as she had, but it's interesting to try and begin that dialogue. How do you stay in touch with the folks that have been your parishioners? And the reason I'm mentioning this is because as we walk into the future with the challenges we already knew we were going to face, how do we get the whole family back together again so we're walking together? And isn't that the theme that we've been hearing about, is accompaniment and walking together and synodality and all kinds of interesting comments. And right now I'm told nationally that we're about 60% coming home, which means this is something that concerns all of us. So let's put the context of talking about what the future of our parishes looks like within the context of the family of faith, and how we use this synodality process in our relationships with our parishioners to make sure that the parishes that we have are energized and filled with the Spirit. Does that make sense? Well, within that context, you probably noticed that things have changed. The current structure with regions and PCAs was put in place in 1999. And in 1999, we had, let me be accurate here, we had 238 priests. Now, we have 74 full-time active priests. A little bit of a shift. And we had then 173 parishes and 10 missions. Now we have 114 parishes and some missions. So there has been a big change in our landscape, and it's affected us all, right? Is anybody unaffected by the shift we've gone through? And we all know that this has been a shift that has accompanied major shifts in what goes on demographically throughout our entire region. This isn't unique to the Catholic Church. When an Air Force base left Rome, it wasn't based on what parishes they belonged to in Rome, was it? It was they and all the support industries left, and that was the change. So we dealt with it, and it was a difficult time. A lot of people sacrificed much to move to the kind of structures we have now, and parishes went through some real tensions. And of course, society went through some tensions too. So with that in mind, we're now 23 years into this structure that had regions and PCAs. And Bishop Lucia has announced that we're going to use something of a new system in a way that he can explain much more effectively than I can. But we're going to use the term vicariates, which is the actual natural canonical structure. And he's already appointed, as you've heard, 7 vicars for Rain, 1 for each of those areas, to make sure that the local church is dynamic and involved, and at every level, our parishes are part of this understanding that we're one church, regardless of where we are in the current landmass of the Diocese of Syracuse. So the question became, how do we put an effective structure together that's going to allow for our parishes to grow and for there to be dynamic Catholic parishes and people, and things have got to change. Obviously, 74 priests, half of whom are over the age of 65, puts before us an interesting challenge. And that means, forgive me for saying this, you know what parochialism is? You know, it was 1956, it was the biggest thing in the Diocese of Syracuse, is the whole parochial league. Some of you remember them. Well, parochialism needs to end, because the only way to do this effectively is with effective collaboration with the laity and with the clergy, and that's going to take in what we call PCAs. And within PCAs, folks are going to have to make recommendations to the bishop about what the future of their PCA might look like and how they can be really effective. This is going to be a real engagement of discipleship, because it has to be about who are we as church in each area of our diocese, and it's not about who's winning what battle. Parochialism has to be over. We need to do this together. And we need to make decisions so our resources actually build up the people of God and carry on our mission at the same time that we're looking at maintaining as many churches as possible, but knowing that PCAs may make decisions that we need to crunch it up. Because, for instance, in one area of our diocese, we have the honor of being the #1 child poverty area in the United States of America. We need to respond to that as church, right? So, what we did, or are doing, which is much more accurate, and you will be engaged further with these conversations, is we took a look at the PCA structure and the regional structure. It became the vicariate structure, and we are in the process of restructuring the vicariates in such a way that PCAs will be part of them, and it means shifting some boundaries. Now, the first boundary I will share with you has to do with the wonderful world of Oswego County. Now, you've heard Bishop Lucia talk about the importance of priestly fraternity and fraternity with our deacons and all the rest of it, and our clergy need to be able to cover the needs of an area. Now, the example he uses has used this morning about a funeral on a day off. Well, if priests are working together, we should be able to get somebody there. There's somebody who's not on a day off. But it means we have to communicate with each other in an entirely new way and see reality in a whole new way. My primary responsibility can't be to St. Mary's and Clinton. It has to be to that area, that PCA, where there's only going to be 2 priests who are in residence, and those 2 better cover each other, right? And the same is true with the calling forth of talents. This diocese has always amazed me with the way in which people come forward and are engaged in ministry, and you're a good example of that. And we need to be calling people forth. We need to be training people. when we send people to Sister Laura's office to be trained, we need to make sure there's a role that they're being trained for. Does that make a little bit of sense? Okay, so let's look at Vicariate number 1. I know that it's a very difficult organizational system to recognize, so we simply call the Vicariates Vicariate 1, Vicariate 2, Vicariate 3. And Vicariate number 1 is Oswego County and Moore. The Moore is, Oswego County is 1 PCA in Vicariate number 1. The Liverpool and Baldwinsville will be combined as a PCA in Vicariate 1. And then there's a very short group that's got 2 of our largest parishes, and the third one the bishop is the pastor of, and that's Sacred Heart and St. Rose of Lima and Mattydale, St. Margaret's, where the bishop is also the pastor. So does that give you a sense of what we're trying to do? Is let's look at who can work together effectively to establish methodologies for ministry and for building community. And that's something that takes every one of us. Now this is still in dialogue, which is why I don't have a major handout for you today. But let me mention some things didn't really change. And of course, in mentioning Oswego to you, it allows me to talk about other areas of the diocese as well. And what you will see in PCAs is that there will be natural ways that parishes begin to relate to each other. And there may be 3 or 4 differing kinds of dialogue going on within a PCA and even with its neighbors as one works through how do we move out of the methodology we've been using into a very similar methodology as we deal with vicariates and PCAs. Vicariate number 2. Don't you love the way that's cleverly done? Number 2 is, we refer to it as the 3/5 PCA, and that PCA is actually 2 original ones, and it's Skinny Atlas, Jordan, Marcellus, Onondaga Hill, the Valley, Fairmount, and Camillus, and this is one place where you can see Our Lady of Hope, which used to be St. James before its merger with Our Lady of Lourdes, has moved in to that PCA because it shares a pastor. Sharing pastors is going to become much more of a notable thing as well. And when Father Michael Gillespie went to St. Michael, St. Peter's on top of the hill, he also became the priest for Our Lady of Hope at the bottom of the hill. Notice I'm not using the word linked. I'm using the word they're sharing a pastor. West side of Syracuse, we're still working on it. It's an artwork in process. That's Mary Ann Cope and the Basilica, St. Charles, St. Anne's, and St. Patrick, St. Bridget's. The 3rd PCA and Vicariate number 2 are the parishes of the north side and the south side of the city of Syracuse, together with All Saints. So, the area I referred to a little while ago is in terms of child poverty rate, that rather sits right in the middle of that PCA. And there are some wonderful people, dedicated people who are part of those teams, both north side and south side, who are very capable of the dialogue that's necessary. You with me so far? And now eventually you're going to get a copy of this and not know all that along, so you don't need to take copious notes. The 3rd finds our Vicar General as a vicar for Rain. And it's 2 PCAs in this particular structure. And the suggestion, the dialogue is about, it's Dewitt, it's St. Anthony of Padua, which moves out of its southside position because the person responsible for Spanish ministry is here as the parochial vicar, and he and Father Kurgan are attentive to the needs of St. Anthony's. So it's Holy Cross, St. Anthony's, East Syracuse, St. Matthew's, Manoa, Bridgeport, Eastwood, and St. Vincent de Paul, Transfiguration of the Lord, and St. Daniel's. St. Daniel's used to be on the, at least as we're discussing it, was on the Route 11 extension. If you had an imagination, you could look at Central Square being the north end of Route 11 and St. Daniel's being the end. Well, St. Daniel's needed to relate to a local parish, and so it's now part of that group that Father Kurgan is the vicar for. And the other area is Fayetteville, Manlius, Chippewa, Cazenovia, and DeRuyter. That indicates a change. Again, we're using one of the models that we're discussing using, and this is a discussion. What we're discussing is, in this particular area, we're using the phrase sharing a pastor. That's it. We will see how far this battle will carry us, but I'm pretty comfortable with the thought that as we get together as PCAs, and each PCA will meet personally with me after we announce this, that our dialogue may take on a little bit of a different tone. In vicariate number 4 is the Rome vicariate. It stays exactly as it is now. And then we go to Utica. Well, I'm wrong. The suggestion is that in Rome, Boonville, which has been sitting out there on its own, is now part of the Rome vicariate. And that brings us to the wonderful world of Utica, which has got 3 PCAs. And the 3 PCAs are pretty effective, but because they're organized the way that they are, they need to enter into some real special dialogue. Now, to give you a sense of some of the challenges that we're facing in this dialogue, is there are 12 priests who are in the Utica area right now, this morning. However, 4 of them are under 65. Everybody else is over 65. We have to get real about the fact we're aging and what kinds of strategies do we need to put in place in each of our PCAs to be effective parochial parishes. Okay. You ready for the fun one?
Yes.
23 years ago, anybody remember Father Frank Case? He was something of a character. Frank, we're talking about you and finally discussing your idea. He came to us at a juncture point in all of our discussions and said, there ought to be a rural vicariate that's filled with people who advocate for rural areas. And at the time, we of course said, no, we're not in a position where we could do that. That's not the nature of what we want to accomplish at this point. But 23 years later, we're saying, as you look at what's going on in our area, somebody advocating for the rural territories is an important person. So, what we're talking about doing is creating a new vicariate, not a previous region. And it would take in southern Onondaga County, Tully and its accompanying parishes, Cortland County, and the northern end of Shenango County. And when I talked with his father Zaresti, who's the vicar, about it, I said, are you comfortable with this? Because it means we're going to have to go in through a series of meetings and develop the identity and really start this process from scratch because it's a whole new orientation. And he said, I'm ready. Well, as relaxed as Father Zaresti can be, that was a great, I'm ready. So that comes into being, which brings us to the seventh one. And the seventh one that we're discussing is the Binghamton area. And you'll notice that what was previously the southern tier, by taking the northern end of the Shenango County and putting it into the new rural vicariate number 6, then we're in a discussion about what happens in Broome County and in Afton, Bainbridge, and Greene. Because Afton, Bainbridge, and Greene have got a whole system of dialogue that they've been developing, and we want to encourage that because that's part of the steps into the future. And then we're looking at just exactly how do you organize the whole Broome County area in an effective way. And the reason that I'm not handing out sheets of paper to you today is because some of these are ongoing discussions that we're nearing conclusions about, but we're not quite there yet. So structure is one thing. The other part of this, though, is we need a whole new way of seeing and a whole new way of hearing, because we're dealing with a church in central New York that's unable to be structured the way it was before. We're moving into new models, which calls for a new kind of patience with one another and a new way of seeing and staying loyal to the basics of our faith as a Christian people and as a Catholic people. It's going to be fun. We're going to make some mistakes. We're also going to have some successes. And when I meet with the PCAs, one of my messages is choose 3 things that you want to do soon and make sure that at least 2 of them are home runs that you can knock out of the park so you can begin to develop a working relationship in this new kind of system. And as you've noticed, while I'm calling it a new kind of system, it's what we've been trying to build now for the last 25 years, right? And something that you put your blood, sweat, and tears into doing. And again, I conclude my part in this with saying thank you for all that you've done. And I know that Bishop Lucia and I would be happy to deal with some questions if you have any. Again, we're not finished yet.
If I can just, before we have questions, just want to explain where the vicariate idea comes from. The word vicar actually means, vicar is in the place of, okay, or in the name of, really. And so when there's a vicar general, it is one who is in the name of the bishop. And the word general means that he represents me sometimes when I can't be in the area of governance, in the area of education, in the area of liturgy. He is like one who represents me. But there are other vicars in the diocese. And so what a vicariate really is it's an extension of the bishop's ministry to the local area. And that's what I'm trying to get across, that we're not, when we get to these areas, we're not talking about just geographic regions, but we're talking about the extension of ministry into the various areas of the diocese. And how do we do that today? In particular, and I'll just give you one of the first examples because that's where it came to mind at first. Yes, Oswego itself was its own region at one point. Well, here's the kick, or the kicker for me at least, was out of all the priests in that vicariate, or in that region, there were 3 pastors. The rest were retired. Well, the big thing is, how then do you build fraternity? How do you build relationships? It's too small for that kind of to see beyond just one's local area. It's the larger church. It's a, as we say in Italian, tutte e due. It's both. It's looking at both the larger picture and the local picture. And so that's where, sharing with Monsignor Lang and with other members of the administrative team, I had the idea that maybe what we need to do when we look at our regions is to change them in 2 ways. To make sure that there was enough mass, if you want to say, mass in the sense of numbers, for this dialogue, for this interaction to happen among priests and deacons and lay faithful. The second part was also geographical in some ways. As Monsignor was describing the PCAs within them, that they can continue to become that pastoral care area. And for me, that's what became very important. You know, when I first came to Syracuse, I think I've confessed this, I could never remember PCA. I didn't know what it meant, really. And of course, COVID didn't help. But in 3 years, I have come really to appreciate what a pastoral care area is. But I guess what I'm also saying is, in these new vicariates, that's where the PCA needs to take on new meaning. It's like we use one of the PCAs in the Oswego group would be what I call the Route 11 corridor. And actually Divine Mercy is at the top, but particularly Sacred Heart, St. Rose, and St. Margaret's. They're all within miles of each other, but how in today's church can they come together? How can they work together? Rather than, as we call it, Monsignor used the word parochialism, rather than competing with one another, how do we work together to build this faith community? And so that's really what is behind this idea of these vicariates. The idea of vicariates, instead of just looking at it as regions, it's really, I want them to be seen as an extension of the church's mission. And that's also where more dialogue can take place. And that's why part of my goal in having these vicariates is that there are more regular meetings of the leadership of these PCAs, but also and of these parishes. So some of the leadership, as I already talked, would be fraternity among the clergy, but it even goes beyond that. Okay, and then when you're discussing diocesan stuff, for instance, when the Hope Appeal will come around. Well, this will give me a chance to visit the different vicariates to say specifically, because one of the concerns you'll see is people don't understand, well, what happens with our Hope Appeal money? Where does it go? What is it used for? Well, hopefully they see that it's being used for the local parishes. But it might not translate down that because everything seems top-heavy at this point. And so that's basically what I'm trying to do also is we're not governing from the top, but it's more of the wheel, that we're all in this together. Okay, so just a little bit of background, and now we can go to the questions. I think, Dave, I saw your hand.
Thank you. I have a question too, if I may ask. Did you say that you're meeting now, or will be meeting with the former PCA groups? I wasn't clear on that.
The meeting will be with the new PCA.
The new PCAs as they're reconstituted, so this is being promulgated now through the pastors?
It will, well, we aren't done with the process, which is why we didn't do any distribution of any materials. And as soon as we are done, it will go to the pastors, but we will do a release of documentation to this group, to the priests of the diocese and to others, along with some of the explanations that we might share.
The other kind of statement question is, we began with some, statistics which most fascinating, of course, on the number of clergy compared to 30 years ago. But it still seems to me that so much of this, the bishop has said, we're driven by certainly a new concept of the church and the church's mission. But still, it seems to me that what the primary driving force has not been a change of mission or ideology. It's been a simple lack of the number of clergy. For example, if we still had 200 plus active clergy, most likely, I don't think we'd be having these conversations.
It's interesting, you remember First Bishop O'Keefe.
Yeah.
Bishop O'Keefe's favorite line in the midst of this conversation was, if I had 4,000 priests and didn't have the laity taking their rightful role in the diocese, I would have failed.
That's a good statement, but and I think that
And he tried to-
the empowerment and the education of the laity is certainly one of the primary goals. But I still think as we continue to think about this overall issue, it's not to diminish the role of the laity or religious deacons, but it seems to me that what you presented even as a fundamental fact is the fact that we don't have the ordained clergy as we did, and therefore, we're celebrating the fact that we have to consolidate, to revision the church, etc. And I'm not against, obviously, for the empowerment of the laity, but it seems to me
There's truth there.
that, if it were a business, and a business was saying, we have a lot of business here, but we don't have enough management. Well, we train more management. And I don't know if that's an exact analogy, but that's what strikes me.
I hear you, and let me go one step, perhaps with that or beyond it. And Sister Laura and I were in Rochester for the graduation of St. Bernard's last night, and on the way we were talking about these things. And one of the challenges we have, and please, yours all, please, is Sister's got the Office of Pastoral Leadership. Her primary function related to that is to see to the training of those who are invited to come forward for specialized training and the rest of it. One of the problems we're having is parishes identifying people who send forward for that kind of training. And until parishes take that process seriously, in terms of looking at their own future, the kinds of staff that they need, the kind of training that staff will need, we have a significant problem. That's one of the reasons I quoted Bishop O'Keefe, because that was one of his frustrations. We get all kinds of elaborate mechanism, trained laity during his administration. But we've still got this reality right now. I'm going to go to the back of the room first.
I guess that's one of the issues. That's one of the issues you get upon, is getting out the laity. And this is a concern that I've always had, is you're not reaching out, okay? You're not sending out, say, hey, these are the things we're going to need, and send it to the people. If you're just using the priests as the funnel into this, you're not getting anybody. Out of St. Elizabeth, we don't have anybody being identified to do that, because no one has said, hey, here are the positions that we're going to need in the future. Are you interested? Do you, is this something you want to do? And that's where I think your program is, I hate to say this, is falling short. We need to have those people in place. We need to be training them as we go along. But if you don't let us know that that's what you need, and that these are the services, or these are the programs, it's not coming out. We have no idea that that's what you need, or what's available. It is just not being communicated. So I think your biggest thing is you need to take that program and punch it up and say, look, here's what we need. These are the services that you provide your parish. Are you interested? As opposed to trying to find somebody to pick someone to do that.
I hear you, and the problem is broader. I agree with you in large part, as Sister would tell you. Spinoids, please.
Just, if I could respond to that, just briefly. Thank you. Thank you for your point, and I can relate to it, and you may not have been on DPC when I stood before this group, and we went through a whole process, but it has to happen more, because we're all charged with a task of doing what you just described, identifying and inviting people. So the process is happening. It does take time, and the responsibility is all of ours to do it. So your point about if we're relying on clergy only, priests and deacons to do that, and they know that that's their responsibility, and they do send people. And there are people who are preparing. But we're preparing for a new model. And also, how do we prepare people to receive that new model in their faith communities? So stay tuned. But it is happening. But it needs to happen more, and I appreciate that. We have to take it out from under the bushel basket. So thank you for your, and we can talk more. But
And
it
if
is
I can
happening.
say 2 comments about that. First of all, that's why we're doing this process.
That's why the whole purpose when I said I wanted to call them vicariates was to get it to the people. And that's also why we're doing the communication process that Catholic Poupart is going to do, because we often find even what happens here doesn't get back to the parishes and back to the parish councils. So that is a dual thing that we are doing right now. That's the whole purpose. This is not an exercise in futility, but it is an exercise to respond to some of the needs that we have heard that are coming out even of our listening sessions, but even beyond. Like, I have to be honest with you, I'm not a person who changes things for the sake of change. But as I was looking at even the geographic map of the diocese, I said, we have to do something. And part of the thing was communication, and the other part was making service manageable. Making service manageable. Because I think sometimes there is a fear that, well, this is too much. And just to give you an idea of this, I mean, don't think we're the only church going through this. I have regular meetings with the Episcopal and Lutheran bishops, and we regularly discuss clergy and parishes and everything. And their comment to me, when I told them, they asked me often about the synodal process. And I talked to them about the empowerment. And they said, you're exactly on there. And then I'll say, and I said, the empowerment has to go, though, beyond ordination. And they agree with that. But even they, when it comes to, and because that's part of the answer too, in order to have Eucharist, we need ordination. You know, you need the ordained priest for the Eucharist. I know there will be other on the theological spectrum, but that is the teaching of the Roman Catholic Church. That's actually the teaching of the Lutheran and the Episcopal churches. And so that is where, even with those sister churches, they also find that struggle that they want to serve the people, but it is an idea that, yes, the vestry, the synod can do so many things, and they're a great example to us of lay involvement, but even they themselves, one of their big challenges, although they have women who are ordained, and although they have married people who are ordained, they still have a problem with finding enough people to lead the Eucharist, to have that. And in fact, and as I've said to you before in this assembly, one of the problems, and I think that's why I say it's deeper. This is why I think Bishop O'Keefe is so right when it's all about conversion at this moment. Because I have a good friend of mine who is a lay pastor in the Methodist Church. And I've often said to him, why don't you, I say, he's married, has family. And I often will say to him, well, why don't you get ordained? And his response back to me is this, I don't know if I can make the commitment. I don't know if I can make the commitment. And I think we have to keep that up there, as I say, when we look at all of this.
The secret that I found comes down to whether it's a priest or a deacon or a member of the assembly. The only way anybody actually receives an invitation is when they're called by name, by somebody who appreciates their skills, and bulletin announcements and flyers don't change the numbers at all. What changes the numbers is inviting somebody to come forward. But I hear you about, and someday I'll answer the question by telling you what crosses the average priest's desk in a single day with the number of requests that he do something. And it's not to take them off the hook, it's just you can only do so much.
Ms. Vickers, it sounds like a great idea, but it seems to be more of what's going on in the pastors being determined in their communication. What effect is it going to have for the average parishioner?
Well, I'm going to answer it from my viewpoint, then we'll ask the bishop to answer it from his viewpoint. My viewpoint is very simple.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I will.
Thank you.
The question is, how does this change anything? After all, you're pointing out the building of priestly fraternity. Yes, and Bishop Braxton, before he was a bishop, came here and did the priest living in September. And one of the things that he suggested, this is in the mid-'80s, was that priests ought to get together and have dinner one day a week. You don't have to talk about business or anything like it. And then what happened was, in Rome, where I was stationed at the time, every Tuesday night, the priests of the entire area around Rome got together for dinner, and usually at St. Mary's. And what happened was our relationships of friendship spilled over into the congregation. It took down a whole set of walls. There was somebody else who, within a second. Oh, wait a minute. I didn't keep the whole promise.
Yeah. And that's part of it. And Monsignor gave the first part. How does this benefit the parishes? It gets the priests talking among themselves so that every parish doesn't think it has to do everything alone. If somebody in a same PCA is having a retreat or having 40 hours, well, why can't it be, well, let's do it together, rather than every parish thinking, and it goes even farther than that when it comes to business administrators and religious education, catechesis. There might be better ways we can share resources. And so that's also, there's a practical thing of building fraternity. But the fraternity leads then to a better sharing of gifts. And not just the gifts of the priest or the deacons or the pastoral care leader of the area, but even more, also maybe of parishes working together more. And so that's what it is. That's why. Especially as we've mentioned the model, not so much of linked parishes, but if a priest is sharing, if a priest is pastor of 2 parishes, and he's in a larger PCA, it gives the priest also some others that he can turn to and say, let's do this together. So part of it is to start doing things together. That we're not independent parishes, that rather we're a faith community. And so that's the bigger vision. That helps. But it's practical for parishes in this way. In the practicality is that maybe they can share some services that they haven't been sharing before.
This will not involve restructuring of any PCAs at this time?
There are tweaks to PCAs, and many of them have been affected by the movement of a parish or two.
So we love our PCA. We get along very well, work well together. So this will,
Where's your PCA?
pardon?
What PCA?
I don't know the number, but we have Father Hage, we have St. Mary's, St. Joan of Arc,
Yeah.
and
That's
St.
in
Bernard's,
Vicariate number 2,
St. Joseph.
and it is what it is, so you won't see any change.
Oh, wonderful.
At least not today.
Thank you.
But you see, that's the danger sometimes. And I have to say that's where we run into problems. It's like, oh, we can't change this. Well, there might be, that's what I talk about, local vision, but there's a bigger vision of church. And we have to come from this very local vision to the wider vision of church. That's what sometimes gets Pope Francis in trouble. But Pope Francis keeps telling the church isn't just the church in the United States. It's not just the church in South America. The church is a universal church. And so we've got to just stop thinking of ourselves and think of the broader group sometimes. And sometimes, I have to say this very truthfully, but the people in Utica have to think about the people in Binghamton. The people in Binghamton have to think about the people in Syracuse. People in Syracuse have to think about the people in the North Country. It all goes together. And the people, and that's why especially with the creation of the rural vicariate, that was one of my big things. We got to remember there's such a place as Norwich. There's such a place as Cortland, okay? And after Bainbridge and all of that. So that's what I'm saying. I understand when things are working together, and certainly that PCA is working together, and that's all part of this. But we have to be careful with, well, we can't change things, because the problem is, like, one change I'm thinking of, and it does involve a change in the PCA, is that Our Lady of Hope is now in the same PCA as St. Michael's and St. Peter's. And that's because they share a common pastor, but it's because of helping. All right?
Amen, Brad.
So my question was really clarification, which I think you've given, that your expectation is these newly formed vicariates will meet on a regular basis. I come from a PCA, I'm in number 1, and that's going to become very large. Our PCA, I have to say, don't get anybody in trouble, is not very active. And I was welcome the opportunity, though I have to say there's a lot of rural areas in Oswego County, so it might be a little hard. I don't want that central square to be the meeting point to me, but you know what I'm saying? I think there's opportunity there. And I also just want to share that recently, because of the number of funerals that we've had in our parish, our priest has called upon his colleagues in our PCA and beyond to help provide some of those services when we get 2 funerals a day, sort of thing, you know. So some of that is going on, but from a lay leadership perspective, I welcome the opportunity to come together and do some of that sharing instead of us doing the same thing on Tuesday that they're doing down the road on Thursday.
Amen.
Just so you know that what the concern was is that sometimes the PCAs are larger. Like Oswego, it does go beyond Oswego, but remember in a vicariate there might be 3 PCAs, so sometimes that structure hasn't changed. But the idea is, yes, that the vicariates would meet more often, that there's more dialogue going on, and because they're right, there are some PCAs, even in my time, who have not met on a regular basis. In fact, that was part of the reason for the listening sessions, is I went to every PCA. So, okay.
And it's possible for PCA to have several things going on.
I think that the concept of the bigger church has to be facilitated by communication. In other words, if there's spiritual activities or educational activities going on in the eastern region and you in the western region, you might really like to participate, but you have to know about it. So that's why I think the Catholic Son's got to start reporting on that and making that available without a lot of cost.
Did our friend from the Catholic Son catch that?
He has stepped up.
She just stepped out, but I'll be here.
Monsignor, the Catholic Sun is available for all DPC members electronically for no cost. So,
The Catholic Sun is available to all DPC members electronically at no cost.
It's also about $27 a year, so it's,
Didn't hear you.
I said it's also about $27 a year.
$20,000 a year. I'm gonna come back so I hear you, because I don't have my hearing aids in. Is that a bill set?
Wow, $20,000 a year, that's a heck of a payment. No, about $27, okay?
It's a lot less. Fine negotiation. Yes.
Just one question. I've dealt with a lot of priests. I've dealt with a lot of priests myself. And I found that a lot of them, as far as the diocese is concerned, they will stay away from diocese. They're treated as if it's the enemy. Okay? And because that church is a corporation by itself, they feel like they're the owners of the church, and they don't really want the diocese to be involved with it. Is there anything that's going to happen legally?
This is the question I'll put on the spotlight on. The spotlight here goes, Larry raises the question about what about the number of priests who say, I've managed to get through an entire ministry without ever having walked through the chancery. And priests who look at, there are some guys out there who may take a different viewpoint to everything we're trying to do, and that the question is, in what way do we begin to bring them back into the fold? And part of that, it seems to me, and it'll be interesting to see where the bishop goes with this too, is when this is a Eucharistic model, and goes back to the question of priestly fellowship. When you sit down at the table and you break bread together and you talk, things change. And a lot of the folks you're talking about aren't in regular contact with groups of priests who might hold other viewpoints that makes them discussable. And so part of enjoying this look at priestly fraternity, one of the good outcomes could be that the guys who think that there's a moat outside of the chancery with alligators in it, they will give it up. There's a lot less of that than there was when I was first ordained.
Yeah, I mean, we're running out of time. We have to do the election, but let me just say that the breaking bread is an important part. I mean, I know that personally, just that every time we meet about every 6 weeks, but when the Lutheran bishop and the Episcopal bishop and I meet, we always have a meal together. And I have found in breaking bread, we find more stuff and we discuss, and there are more commonalities. Let me just say this. There are more commonalities among Christians than we give ourselves credit for. And so I think, again, this is all about, again, this is not an exercise in fertility, but this is really an exercise in trying to bring the Church of Syracuse closer together. This is all about working together. And I realize, and if you want to know how I'm trying to break down the Syracuse thing, is if anybody has said, if you ever look at my schedule, yeah, I'm all over the place. And so I'm down in Binghamton. This week I was in Norwich. I purposely stay overnight with priests sometimes, just to give myself a chance to, I'll be honest with you, have a drink of scotch with them, but sit down and just discuss and visit. And to me, that's how we're going to break this down. Is there any? I saw one more hand. So.
We're talking about the communications and everything.
Right.
I just heard that USCCB is going to close their publications.
Yeah, the CNS. I don't know what's all behind that right now, to be honest with you. I know there was a question of finances, and but I'm just, supposedly they're closing a couple offices. My understanding is not all of the CNS. My understanding is there were a couple offices closing, That will affect the employment of some personnel. There's a downscaling going. There are some, like for instance, the area of publications. They were, publications being they were their own publishers, well, they were losing money with that. So there's some aspects of the communication thing they were looking at. Again, my understanding is the Catholic News Service itself is not going away. It's that they are closing a couple of offices in the country. That's my understanding.
We're all together and we're here. By the way, before I leave, a number of you have asked me how my brother is doing. And he had spinal surgery 6 weeks ago. He's on track to recovery. The permanent brace is now off. He just needs to wear the 4 hours a day that generates bone growth, and he's as honorary as ever. His physician says he can come back for Memorial Day weekend. He says, I'm going to be back by Mother's Day. I've done my best to talk him out of that. We'll find out whether or not he succeeds.
Thank you very much, Monsignor and Bishop. Now I'm going to call on the co-chair of the nominating committee, Bishop Lucia, to make the presentation of the nominations. We'll see if there are any nominations from the floor, and we'll proceed with the bishop.
Okay, it is that time of year, so if you have your yellow sheet in front of you, you'll see at the present moment, I'm not going to read all of their biographies, but you will see there is a nomination for chairperson of Mary Beth McCall. There's a nomination, Mary Beth, okay. Vice chairperson of Chris Gorman, okay. And a secretary membership chairperson, John Sweeney. There's John over there, okay. Now, at this time, as with elections, there is an opportunity to make, from the floor, to make any other nominations. So at this time, I'm going to ask for any other nominations for these positions. They say going once, going twice, thrice, okay. I hear no other nominations, so we present to you this slate of DPC officers for 2022 to 2024. I guess the easiest way to do this morning without a written ballot is to do it by assent. The assent, probably the easiest, would be by a show of hands. Those in favor of accepting this slate of officers, if you would raise your hand. You may put your hands down. Are there any nays? Are there any abstentions? So, Mary Beth,
Thank you.
Christopher, and John, congratulations. Now,
the term of office starts for the new officers and the new executive committee July 1st. So we finish our fiscal year, our calendar year, DPC year, June 30th. Then they take over. And other than that, I think we're pretty well set for today. We would ask Bishop to have a closing prayer and bless the food for our lunches. As you leave today, you take your name tags and actually take the placard out of the plastic, put them in the box. It'll make it easier for us on attendance and keeping track. And Father Kurgan had this room spick and span when we got here this morning, so when you leave, clear off your table, push the chairs in. It'll help us help him. Thank you very much, everyone. Bishop?
Again, I want to thank you all for being here on a Saturday morning, especially on a nice Saturday morning. But more than ever, I hope this helps you see that we do take seriously your input. This is not, as I say, these are not just spinning of wheels. I've tried to make, and especially in the last 12 months, as we come out of COVID, I'm really trying to move things forward. Sometimes we get stuck in a rut, we do same old, and so we are really trying to, again, some of the major issues I've heard, communications, parishes knowing what's going on. Like I say, for me, one of my experiences is like 3 sections to the diocese when I'm trying to pull it together as one. So there's all different things going on, but hopefully you see it's being worked upon, including where we're even beginning to work on stuff from the synodal point of view, and being responsive to what we've been said. So hopefully in the coming months you're going to see more of that, and like I will be interested. Maybe summer's one of those hiatus time. I can't say all of this is going to be accomplished by September, but maybe by our November meeting. But hopefully by our meeting this time next year, we will see some things going. Okay? So, let's pray together. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. And bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts, which we are about to receive from thy bounty, through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Bon appetito.